to The Guardian, transgender women are being sent back to male prison under an executive order issued by President Donald Trump. In a recent report from Democracy Now! Stated that 17 transgender women have coverage under a lawsuit they filed, but the remaining transgender population have been sent back and are suffering horrible abuses in the form of rape and by not only the male population, but abuse from the prison guards. So the impact of this decision can be seen as it relates to a segment of this transgender population that don't have coverage. But more importantly, we can see the impact that this decision is having on the population in general, the prison population in general. What do you think? Should an executive order supersede a court order where multiple court decisions that came out and said that transgender women should remain in the population where they're at? Or should an executive order supersede that regardless of the court? To learn more about trans women and the LGBT community's resistance, I spoke with Deidre Farmer, who in the mid-1990s filed a historical lawsuit against the Federal Bureau of Prisons because of their complicity in allowing rape to exist in all prisons they govern. Out of this lawsuit came PREA, Prison Rape Elimination Act. It became policy, it became law throughout the prisons throughout America.
I'm Deidre Farmer. I'm the Executive Director of Fight for Justice. I was incarcerated in the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a total of about 25 to 30 years. I brought the first transgender case accepted and decided by the United States Supreme Court. In that case, Farmer versus Brennan, the U.S. Supreme Court said that prison officials can be held liable for the sexual assault of other inmates when they knowingly place inmates at risk of danger. I am currently working with several organizations on cases that challenge the executive orders brought by Donald Trump regarding transgender people in prison as well as in the military.
Talk about how this suit that you came into existence, and more importantly, why?
I entered the Bureau of Prisons as a teenager, and around when I was 20 years old, or maybe 19, I was transferred to the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute. And I had never been in a penitentiary environment before and really did not know what to expect. And I was in the prison system at Terre Haute about a week when an inmate came into my cell with a knife and demanded that I have sex with him. And when I refused, he beat me up and raped me. And then a number of his homeboys or, guys that he associated with, they sort of held me a hostage in the cell for a day or two. And finally, I ended up in protective custody. And I had already started studying law and spending time in the library. And of course, when you're in the segregation unit, you find out, other people who have had the same experience, and they weren't necessarily transgender people. Some of them may have just been LGBTQ, or some of them just may have been young guys that were vulnerable, or, other people viewed them as weak, And so when I was transferred from Terre Haute, this is something that continued to play on my mind because I knew that these people like me had, went into protective custody, and therefore the prison officials knew what was happening in the population, but they weren't doing anything about it. And so I brought a suit claiming that when prison officials know that you are at risk of danger of assault or rape, that they can be sued for it. And the district court and the Court of Appeals did not agree with me, but the U.S. Supreme Court accepted the case. I filed the cert petition on my own, wrote it on my own, and filed it on my own, and they accepted it. And then a friend of mine who was an attorney at the ACLU National Prison Project represented me in the Supreme Court. And of course, the court held that if you can prove that they knew because of the environment or because of previous incidents, then you can sue them.
Out of this litigation came what is now commonly known as PREA. And PREA is Prison Rape Elimination Act. And in the prison system right now, based on this advocacy, in the prison system right now, it's policy that they have autonomous system set up where prisoners can complain about being sexually mistreated. Talk about, okay, now we know this is a fact that PREA exists throughout the system, federal, state, county jail, city jail, whatever. It exists. But talk about now, the president issued this order, and according to the information according to the executive order that was issued, all transgender people are to be sent back to institutions that they've been identified by their original sexual origin. If it's a male that's transgender, he's gonna be sent, and he's in a female prison, according to Donald Trump, he's gonna be sent back to a male prison, and vice versa. Talk about the impact that's gonna have on the transgender population in general, with the general prison population overall.
It's really what you're doing. You are actually sanctioning the death of people, transgender people, and whether they are transgender or otherwise, it's still human beings. And we, of course, should not be subjecting human beings to death just because they do not conform to what we believe or our ideology is of what human beings should be. Of course, in my case, the Supreme Court recognized that people with certain vulnerabilities, including gender dysphoria or transgender, are vulnerable in certain populations. After my case, there were many studies done, and consequently, the U.S. Congress took the issue up, and they enacted the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which is supposed to have zero tolerance for rape in prison, because, as the Supreme Court said, rape is not a part of the sentence. And of course, Congress implemented PREA because it recognized, after many, many hearings, hearing testimony from many people, women, young people, disabled people, mentally challenged people, gender conflicted people that had been sexually assaulted in prison or in jail. And they, of course, consequently implemented PREA, which is nationwide standards. It does not create legal rights, but if you violate it, you can lose federal funding. And of course, the executive orders that Trump has issued totally ignores what the Supreme Court has said, totally ignores what the U.S. Congress has said, and what Trump is saying. Despite the vulnerabilities that you have, you're going back into that environment despite the knowledge that you will be raped, despite the knowledge that the person who raped you might kill you so that you cannot tell. And this is not just an ideology. This is not, just a presumption. This is something that happens, has happened. And, and even now for transgender people who remain in facilities consistent with their biological gender, it is happening, And so I think that to say that you will take a incarcerated transgender woman
Right.
who has had vaginoplasty and therefore has a vagina,
Come on.
and you're going to place her into a male institution. I think that it's the same as placing a woman in there.
Right.
And to place a person at that risk, I think it's just inhumane.
In Baltimore, I spoke to Ronnie Taylor, a policy advocate with Free State Justice, about the adversities facing the LGBTQ community in this current political climate. Also, we talked about the historical activism of the LGBTQ community.
Thank you for having me. Ronnie Taylor, as you said, pronoun she, her. I serve as the Advocacy Policy and Partnerships Director here at Free State. And so we're the oldest LGBT legal organization providing legal services, resources, and advocacy and education in the state of Maryland. And so we're the only, we call ourselves Maryland's LGBTQ plus advocates.
Okay, and I was looking at some of the y'all accomplishments. Y'all have been given numerous awards, but more importantly, y'all had got a bill passed that deal with marriage. Talk about that.
Absolutely. So we were birthed out of the merger of Equality Maryland, for those that are familiar with that. We became Free State Legal Project and then Free State Maryland. And so Equality Maryland passed the Same-Sex Marriage Act numerous of years ago, and it was such an accomplishment for Maryland. And so we wanted to figure out how we can continue to position ourselves as advocates. And so unfortunately, when the doors closed of Equality Maryland, Free State Legal Project continued to work when it comes to our advocacy portions. And so we've been continuing to do that. We have some amazing legislative wins, such as the Trans Health Equity Act.
Right.
This recent year, we passed the Carlton R. Smith Jr. HIV Modernization Act.
Right.
So the awards are great, and it's great to be recognized, but we're going to continue to do the work for Marylanders.
Okay, so now, recently, in the 2024 presidential campaign, Kamala Harris was being denigrated for providing or signing off on the legislation to allow people of transgender to have sex change according to what their orientation was. And the President of the United States and the Republican Party, they had a campaign ad. And in the campaign ad, they was promoting this as something that was inhuman and immoral, with the way they was representing the person that was getting their sex change. They had them looking like almost monstrous.
Yeah.
Talk about the impact that is having on the transgender community right now.
Those acts that have come into place and how it is crucial to our current standing. Marylanders, I pride myself in saying that on a local level, we have a great partner in our governor, Wes Moore.
Right.
However, federally, we are under attack, and that attack has looked like a variance of ways. Again, military personnel, folks, and particularly trans folks, have been serving in the military for numerous of years.
Honorably mentioned.
And so to have their careers taken away for an oath that they took to protect this country is inhumane. In regards to our prison systems, the Prison Rape Elimination Act is a thing.
Right.
And so we're going to put folks in cells, and we're disregarding, medical procedures and stating that you are trans, and it's simply an attack. And furthermore, there's just been numerous things in which this party has done. There's been over 886 pieces of legislation introduced by the federal administration for the attack of trans individuals.
Oh man, this is outstanding, because you put all that time and energy into trying to moralize or have a moral agenda over people's lives. And then, but at the same token, you're a convicted felon. You paid off Stormy Daniels for lewd and lascivious behavior towards her, but yet you turn around and now you want to become the moral cop of people's lives. Talk about the impact that this is having on the transgender community and y'all ability to raise funds.
It's hard. Funding is at a ultimate halt right now for a lot of organizations, including mine, because, if you put terms in such as DEI or
Yeah.
community,
Right.
which, our federal government are trying to eliminate, it puts us in a really tricky situation. And so thankfully, we've been able to diversify our funding tools as I'm in charge of that portfolio and be able to still do the work, but it's challenging because we don't want to get rid of our moral compass, and we refuse to. We're going to continue to do the work, but we find ourselves in a position in which the federal administration has proven that they do not want to be a partner in this work. Thankfully, we have a great federal delegation in Maryland that's going to continue to do the work and put forth legislation to combat that hate and that anti stuff, but it's still there, and it's impacting everyday lives. It's affecting people's housing, their mental health, their ability to work, and so forth and so on.
And we interviewed a transgender female that was responsible for PREA, Prison Rape and Enforcement Act, and she was saying that right now it looked like it's an all-out assault on transgender men or women in prison, based on the fact that the president has put an executive order out saying that you're going to be transferred to the prison of your assigned gender, as opposed to your current gender. Talk about that if you can.
I couldn't agree with her more. It's definitely an overall attack. It's an agenda. It's an attack. And one of the things that I often remind people in my advocacy work here is our current president, and I use that term loosely, these are just executive orders. This person has done nothing but signed executive orders throughout his time, throughout this term. There has not been any laws. The reality is there's still a chance to work and get things done on a local level. So now is the time more than ever. Primary general elections are coming up. We need folks to get in the race for the 2026, their local elections, and do the work because it can be done. And overall, you need to hold your elected officials to the responsibility when they took that oath to serve in Annapolis or serve in whatever state house you elected them to be in, to do the work of all Marylanders. It's inhumane. Trans people are a part of the political, social, economic, living sphere that we all consist in and exist in. And so this attack on said sub-community, it's horrendous. And there absolutely needs to be something done about it.
This government is taking a conservative act. Like I said, we went back to the military, don't ask, don't tell. But they just did an executive order around that. The Secretary of Defense issued a memorandum out about that. Their prison, and they taking federal funds from anyone, and they under the auspices of DEI. But they primarily saying that if you're transgender, then you don't have an arm and a leg to stand on. Why do you think they having such a conservative act towards this particular community, sub-community?
Great question. Is we have to highlight folks from both sides of the aisle are trans.
Yeah.
President Musk's daughter is a woman of trans experience, but she's not often talked about. She's been pushed underneath of a carpet, and it's, again, rooted in ignorance.
And as we go forward, right, what do you want our viewers to know about the transgender community? And more importantly, to speak to them about what transgender means to you and what it should mean to society. Because we live in a society supposed to be equal. They say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal and have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if you don't have if your life is in jeopardy, your liberty is at jeopardy, and then therefore you ain't gonna have no pursuit of happiness. So talk about why we should be looking at this issue and be critical about this administration as it relates to their attitude towards people.
Yeah. So one of the things I often say is trans people since the beginning of time have done an amazing body of work, and our portfolio showed that. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera stood on the front lines of the Stonewall movement, and they threw the first brick.
That's right.
Not often something that we talk about. Trans people are elected officials. We have Precious Brandy Davis down in the South. We have Andrea Jenkins in the Midwest. We have Sarah McBride, our first Congresswoman. And so folks are capable and willing to do the work, but we refuse to be ostracized. And so what it means to me, and thank you for asking me that question, I have prided myself, and it's often a label that I wear with pride. And I introduce myself and my pronouns and say I'm a woman of trans experience
Right.
because I refuse to dim that light in the work that I'm doing.
That's right.
And so we're in advocacy spaces, we're in policy spaces, we are in, in all of the spaces. And so it's ultimately the education that gets into it. And so the willingness to learn. There are some of us that are willing to do our trans one-on-one conversations with you, but you have to come to the table with a willingness to learn.
That's right.
And so oftentimes our political landscape has shown that it's okay to be disrespectful and neglectful of said communities, but there's some work to be done.
There you have it, the real news, Rattling the Bars. The transgender community is here. It's here to stay. We're not trying to make no excuse for it, but they're human beings like us. The only problem that we have with this whole entire issue is that someone thinks that they have the moral compass to determine who should have a quality life versus whose life should be treated differently. This country is prided on equality, and we're saying that equality is paramount when it comes to recognizing the transgender community and all their accomplishments they have made. These stories about the LGBT community and transgender and their rights to be treated as human beings is something that Rattling the Bars believe should be brought front and center as it relates to humanity. This is about humanity. This is not about a person's preference, sexual orientation. This is about people being treated as human. And we at Rattling the Bars believe that these stories, when you look at them and evaluate them, will give you a sense of understanding about humanity. We ask that you continue to look at Rattling the Bars, and we ask that you give your views. Tell us what you think about these stories, because it's your views that give us content and context to our next story.